Mi abuela is 85 years old, and since we began social distancing, abuela's distraction has been spent in our living room watching telenovelas y las noticias. I spend my day stuck in my room, pressured by writing deadlines and Zoom calls. I try to break down to her how I can still work through the computer and what a Zoom call is, but it goes over her head, so she leaves me alone for a couple of hours until she comes barging in the room reminding me, "No has comido en todo el día." We sit down to eat, and through conversation, she explained to me the latest updates with COVID-19. Abuela doesn't understand that through social media, I'm already aware of these updates. Univision gives her tips on how to disinfect the house, precautions she should warn us about when running essential errands. She knows that she's high risk, being that she's 85, so she's very attentive to what the news informs her. Trump announced a stimulus check of $1,200 given to every American. Excitedly, she asked, "¿Y nosotros? ¿Nos van a dar?" I have to explain to her that undocumented people who file taxes with an ITIN number do not qualify. She shows concern for her comadres because she knows they aren't as lucky as her. She knows she has me, and with my English, I've been essential in helping navigate resources for her. She also heard that Governor Newsom in California announced an eviction moratorium. ¿Y qué es eviction? I explained to her that this means landlords cannot evict people for not being able to pay the rent. But it does not make sense, because even if you're not able to pay, your rent will accumulate and you will need to pay back rent. For many undocumented people who live paycheck to paycheck, this will create a system in which they will be indebted to landlords. No es justo. Si nosotros trabajamos. Abuela is aware that during this pandemic, undocumented labor is the backbone that is holding America together. These essential workers are the same ones we've seen go viral for being asked to speak English while providing customer service. These are the workers so many opposed to making a living wage with the excuse, if they wanted to make more money, they should have gone to school. As if education did not equal student loans and was a guarantee of making a living wage in this country. These are also the farm workers we essentialize when wanting to prove that brown hands pick your salad. Abuelas comadres are like her, non-traditional workers. They are street vendors, recycle bottles and cans, work cleaning hotel rooms, nannies, or go door to door selling Mary Kay products. She calls them, and when they have questions, she hands me the phone so I can explain to them the resources provided locally. Las señoras are grateful for my intelligence, and before hanging up, say, "Gracias a Dios que te llamé." Thank God I called you. In the same regard, Abuela has placed the uncertainty of this moment in prayer. She sits with the giant print Bible in her lap, and with her magnifying glass, she reads scriptures. During this quarantine, she has vowed to read the Bible cover to cover. She says her faith is the sole reason she has been able to survive this country, and I believe her. It takes a divine power, unearthly energy to be undocumented in America. While the rhetoric in this country is that we are the invisible enemy, Abuela and her comadres built networks of support for one another. Through phone calls, texts, and WhatsApp messages, they check in on each other. While the Trump administration weaponizes these moments to vilify us, we prepare for the next battle that lies ahead. The invisible enemy, a group of señoras praying for the fate of the undocumented. And those are the amazing señoras that I have the pleasure of, who also motivate me and also keep me moving forward. The other significant part that I tried to do in that video was definitely showcase, right? Oftentimes, right? Especially in these moments that we do celebrate undocumented students, it's very important to kind of also think about the people that oftentimes don't get the attention. And I think that being, said, is like a lot of undocumented elders that live among us that don't have the luxury of retiring. I've known so many señoras that, señoras que son paleteros, that, son raspados, that have these side hustles in order to make a living. And so for me, like, that's more significant too. How do we also talk about non-traditional workers, which is people that create their own businesses, and, are continuing to build lives. And so the video was about that. And more importantly, like a community that takes care of each other. The beautiful thing that came out of that video is that we were able to fundraise money for these señoras, and between my social media and teaming up with a local nonprofit organization by the name of Siren for Immigrant Rights, we were able to provide assistance for 26 undocumented families. Um, and I think for me, that was the most impactful thing because it was one poem. And I think I realized that that's the power that art has, and the power if we're able to articulate our predicament and do it in a way that's dignified. Um, it can really impact people. So I'm really, really, super happy that we were able to do that. Obviously, I'm one person. I can't really do a lot, but I think within my capacity, I'm really grateful. And obviously now, the for me, it's like, how can I become a resource to the community that I come from? How can I be of assistance? And so, yeah, now, right now, we have this little network of senoras that, I'm hoping, finding resources for them and making sure that they're good, for paying the rent and all that stuff. So I'm really grateful for that. The presentation, I decided to title it "We've Never Needed Document Papers to Thrive." And I started thinking about this idea that when I was I never really came out as undocumented. Oftentimes when we do hear narratives about coming out, it's like, you come out and you start telling people. But I grew up in an undocumented community. I grew up with a lot of my neighbors that will have the same predicament. So I never really felt alone. It was more of a matter of fact. I didn't have parents that, hid the truth for me. It was just, it is what it is. That's how I learned to view this status. But what I started noticing when we started doing these narratives and people started picking up the stories is that people kind of minimize undocumented lives into these things that we were just powerless. And so I didn't like that, because how is it possible that I came here in 1991? We started kind of getting visualization like in 2001, when we started really discussing who undocumented students were, what dreamers were. We started building all this language that was giving visibility to us. But what happened between that time, right? Was that mean that I did not exist? And so for me, it was like, no, I want to showcase the genius that we embody. So for me, it was that I want, oftentimes undocumented people, we are asked to kind of give away our power, because in order for people to believe that we need some sort of immigration relief, people need to see us suffering. And so I was no longer interested in that. Like, I was more like, no, I want to showcase the ways that we're winning, and the ways that despite the problems that we face, we continue to keep our vision, our eyes on the prize, and continue to, build our lives. So yeah, that's why I decided we never needed paper stripe. And also because it's also like a reminder of what is at stake, right? What is the thing that hinders us? And it's just a social security number. These are my grandparents, my abuelita and my grandfather. And I think I draw a lot of inspiration for them, being that they're elders, and they're also, undocumented. My grandfather passed away about 3, 4 years ago. And one of the most inspirational things that he did for us was definitely remind us of the reason we were here, right? My grandparents recycled bottles and cans in order to make a living. But all the time, my grandfather reminded me, like, once you graduate from college, I'm gonna know that I'm okay to go back to Mexico, and you'll be able to live a full life. And he kept his word. He left back to Mexico. The last time I saw him was in 2016. I was granted advance parole, and I got to go to Mexico for the first time. And I think that was very impactful, because I realized that, my grandfather returned thinking he was gonna find the Mexico he left behind. And obviously, time does not stop. Things change. A lot of his compadres, or the people he grew up, passed away. So he found himself very isolated in a place that he once knew, but because he was so gone so long, he no longer recognized. But I think that's what fuels me now. My grandmother's still with me. She's 86 now. She lives here in San Jose with me. But I think right now my purpose has become, how do I make my grandmother's life as easy as possible and as enjoyable as possible? Because I think our parents and grandparents already worked so hard, that for me now it's like, how do I utilize my talents and my abilities to create a life that is pleasurable and enjoyable, And I hopefully, as you are in college and, and continue to pursue your education, in those moments that you feel lost or confused, or you feel imposter syndrome that you're not supposed to be in this classroom, hopefully you're reminded of the labor that your parents did, or like the sacrifices, and how at least you have a group of people rooting for you and they know that you're very capable. And I think hopefully that will, light more fire under you so you continue to envision yourself. And let me tell you, I am a product of community college. I transferred to San Francisco State. And I know how impactful me getting education and going to college was, because now, I think I'm one of the first college graduates for my family. And now I'm able to navigate upward mobility and really help my family, get out of poverty. Because I think that's the other thing we don't talk about, the ways in which us as undocumented students and people, most of us grow up with extreme poverty or below the poverty line. And there's a certain level of shame with that. But I think once I was able to get rid of that vergüenza and tap into the power of the things that I actually learned, now I'm able to navigate and pull my family with me. Of course, it's so much work because you're one person and there's so much pressure, but I think that that is the beautiful reminder. I like to recognize my own privilege. I have DACA, I have deferred action for childhood arrivals, an executive order signed by Obama in 2012. It grants me legal authorization to work. Every 2 years, I pay the government $495. And I say privilege to have DACA because I also understand that with the DACA program being in constant shifting and morphing and constant attack, we've created a condition in which now there are generations of younger undocumented people that do not qualify for this program. I am very well aware that there's so many high school students that are graduating that do qualify for this program, but because now it's at a standstill, there's no new applications coming in, it becomes very difficult, and they no longer, can't apply for the program, so they're fully undocumented. As somebody that worked, I think there's also generations of young people that don't know a life beyond DACA, meaning they don't know how to work without a social security number. And I was part of a generation that DACA was not even part of my life, right? And I know it shifted. So I think like these different generations of experiences that we embody is important to recognize. Um, Obviously DACA definitely shifted my life. It changed it drastically, because due to the social security number, now I have access to be competitive in the workforce, meaning that I can apply to jobs that actually pay me a normal rate. I can definitely apply for jobs that give me benefits. And we all know how, especially in this country, how health benefits are super, super important. And also, I can advocate for myself in the workforce. I know my talents, I know my abilities, and hence I can put a price to my labor. And I think right now we're having a lot of conversations around, worker shortages, right? More people are saying, oh, people don't want to work because of these checks. No, I think it's this realization that we're realizing that we can't make enough money. And even though we're fighting for $15 minimum, a federal minimum wage, even that it's not sufficient to feed families, right? So it's very important to us to be aware of that. And then my first job with my DACA was working as an assistant librarian at San Francisco State University. And I realized what a difference it is to work as, as someone that has the legal protections, as opposed to someone that works as an undocumented person that doesn't have those legal protections. And we all know this. We've all had family members that get sick on the job. Even right now with the positive COVID cases, they can't get covered. And we know that we're all like a medical bill away from being more into debt. So I think for me, it's really, really recognizing. And if you're a citizen, someone that's born in this country, and has immigrant parents, it's also too important to recognize that you should really uh, live your life as that, or really claim the advantages that you have, because your parents can't. So really thinking about those things. I was born in 1988. Actually last week, I think I was born last week, marks 30 years since I came to this country. I'm 33 now, so I came here when I was 3 years old. And it's very interesting. We didn't really celebrate. I think it's very interesting because our family, we don't, it's interesting because we don't document things, and most of us are so much on survival mode that we don't document like these really monumental moments. So I was trying to pin down the actual date that we come from by interviewing my family, but they were like, oh, you came around this time, or you came around this time. So it's really, really hard to know the exact date, but I know it was mid-October. But we came from the state of Guerrero, Mexico, which is southern Mexico. Southern Mexico very much known for, being an indigenous state, being a state that has a lot of political resistance, a really, really, really amazing, beautiful state. And I point that out oftentimes because, when we do talk about Mexicans and Mexican hegemony, is this idea that we're all the same. But I think in reality, it's very, very important to recognize that we are just as diverse in the United States. We have similar issues, we have similar attitudes, but I think just our history, our foods, our traditions are vastly different from region to region. And yeah, I came here when I was 3 years old. This picture is of my siblings. Me and my older brother are undocumented, and my younger siblings are born in this country, so they are citizens. um this would be considered a mixed status family. For so many of us, right, we come from so much. We have a tia that's has a visa. We have a uncle that's a resident. We have another one that's a citizen. We someone that's, a refugee, like different statuses. And these statuses all signify the different advantages and resources that are allocated to us. um when we first started talking about undocumented people, I don't know if you grew up watching Spanish TV, but it was very common for Jorge Ramos to do a special on crossing the border. And we would cross the border with these migrants to show just the hardships that we face crossing the border. And so for me, I became fascinated with this idea that people wanted us to showcase the actual ways in which we cross the borders, or to recount these really traumatic experiences that we had as children. And it's interesting because I did a writing prompt with a couple of writers that crossed the border, of what was the first smell that they remember from that crossing. Um, and obviously these are really, really hard stories because, it's so traumatic. But for me, I was more interested in this fascination that we've created in media, in which we extract this undocumented pain and trauma, and the more hard it is, the more juicy and more palpable it becomes to convince people that, again, we need immigration relief, or that, to justify our presence in this country. But then I thought what a deficit it is for us to continue to live lives, and for us to think that our lives are just suffering and pain and all these things. And what does that do to your psyche? What does that do to your confidence? And what does that do to your spirit if you're showing up already to an event as somebody wounded, that's going to open the wound more for some people to believe you? I don't know if that's an equal trade-off. And I didn't want to be that. And I didn't want to be that because my grandparents always raised me with this idea that, yes, you're poor, but you're not a pobrecito, right? There's a difference between being economically struggling, but actually confidence. It's like, at least you have your hands, you have your abilities, you're smart, you have different things for you to get by. So always think of that. So I think of that a lot when, I feel confused or lost. We crossed over in 1991. My upbringing was very much Americanized. I feel like that's why, I consume a lot of pop culture. I speak the way that I speak. That's why, I embrace being bicultural. That's why I can speak Spanglish. And in the early 90s, of course, we remember that there was still bilingual education throughout the K through 12. So I was very blessed. Even though I spoke English, my mom always signed me to bilingual education classes. And obviously in the views of other educators, bilingual ed was looked as kind of remedial, in the sense that you're getting immigrant kids to learn Spanish and English, or they're like adapting or assimilating to the country. But I was really grateful because I was able to retain my Spanish, I can read, write, speak in español. Sometimes se me traban las palabras, so I have to, because I speak Spanglish, but I'm really grateful for that ability because I realize that's a superpower compared to younger people now that come here and, because they're so immersed in English, lose that language. I grew up bicultural. En la casa, we spoke Spanish, full Spanish, y luego en la calle, we spoke English. So I think for me, like this, being able to navigate these two worlds is what gave me an understanding of my place in the world. I, of course, the ever so kind of universal truth that so many of us who grew up bilingual translating for our parents was definitely a sense of annoyance for us as kids because we're like, we just want to play, but you can't play because you got to go translate these things. But at the same time, I think this would allow me to fall in love with language. I learned that if I was able to effectively communicate, if I were able to build sentences or able to advocate, then I can defend my grandparents, or I can help them get resources. I can talk to the local church for food. I can, translate at the PTA meetings or like with the principal's office. I can do these different things and defend them because obviously there's a kind of cultural awareness that some of our parents don't get because they try to replicate Mexico or the homelands that they come from here. So I'm really grateful for that. Again, my grandparents recycled bottles and cans. I think this is very interesting when we talk about undocumented labor because we always exist as a myth, or we never really position in the places that we actually live. We exist as these invisible beings. But I think it's very important for us to talk about the labor that our parents do because it's very, very significant. And you see like the talent that it is to work in that industry. So many of our parents who happen to be undocumented are considered low skill workers, and if you know anything about that kind of labor, there is nothing low skill about construction, about any of these jobs, because you actually need a level of talent. And sometimes I talk in comparison to that, like, I don't think I can do that. All I know is how to speak and write emails, So I really try to really break that kind of conversation of what is considered a talent and what is not. And I would say that my grandparents were super, super talented and genius because even though they recycle bottles and cans, what they were able to do within our community was more impactful. They developed a network with local Mexican restaurants that saved the recyclables for them, and they would take them to recycling bin and recycle. So they already had their kind of route, and they already had little houses on our neighborhood that would save the recycles for them. And I find that very, very interesting because nobody taught them that. This is something they took upon themselves. So I think for us as immigrants that exist outside of this kind of area of work, really talking about our entrepreneur spirits, right? That we create jobs out of nothing. And I think if we just were given the opportunity, I just imagine how many small businesses can flourish out of giving the time and the opportunity and the space for us to really think how we can make this business grow. Obviously, my grandma doesn't do that anymore, and I'm really grateful because that's one of my biggest goals was like, how can I help my families for them to stop working. And yeah, so I think I'm always rooting for las señoras that are creating their own businesses, and I find it very inspiring. So if you have a mom or a parent, I think it goes a long way if you just recognize it's like, hey, I'm really proud of you. And I know as immigrants, this is the other thing, we're so caught up. I talk about how we're so caught up trying to defend ourselves against xenophobic rhetoric and trying to prove that we're good immigrants, that oftentimes we don't really stop to really look internally and see how we can better the relationships between our own family members. So for me, it's like, how do I recognize my mom's anxieties, but also tell her like, hey, I'm really proud of you. And hopefully create a system of where we support one another. I get asked all the time if I'm afraid. Obviously, when the Trump administration was in office, it was a very heightened time for a lot of us, right? We didn't know what policy was coming. We didn't know how we were going to be under attack. It was really, really, really scary sometimes. And obviously, we started watching these videos, right, in which, you know, people are getting deported while they're dropping their kids off to school. We're starting seeing these videos of ICE raids and meat packing factories. We're starting to see all these ICE raids at work. But then I started thinking of like, who are those videos for, right? And the idea was that when we look at undocumented media, there's anything positive. How can we continue to inspire our communities when all the videos we see are about us getting deported? And what does that do to us? It makes us more scared, right? So for me, there was a time where I was like, okay, grandma, we're not watching this news channel for now because you're just gonna get very scared and you're not gonna, you know, you're gonna be thinking of these things all the time. So definitely turning off the TV was very, very important. But for me as a poet, as a writer, it's like, how do we encourage other poets and creators to create bodies of work that do inspire, that do motivate, that do uplift? You know, I want the senoras to watch my poems and be like, oh, that's me, or like, I feel amazing. I want to our community deserve a mental break from this kind of anxiety that people have built around us. So, you know, I always say that no, I'm not necessarily afraid. I'm afraid that we continue to perpetuate these same models of storytelling. And I'm afraid that we'll start believing that all we are a deportation narrative, or that all we are these stories of constant anxiety. And I want to see us, I want more stories of us laughing, dancing, being messy, and building lives. I think that's what I want to do within the work. Of course, history is very important for us because we know that xenophobic policies have existed for a long time. In 1994, in California, we have Governor Pete Wilson grants us, it's promoting Prop 187. I know we just celebrated Latinx History Month, and we are like in closing it off, right? Latino Heritage, Latinx Heritage Month. But you know, it's important to know that Prop 187 is kind of what kind of galvanized Latino power. This is a direct attack against Latino immigrant communities at the time. And this idea that we are stealing resources or stealing jobs or making the American economy bad. But the reality is that is a myth. It's the way that we scapegoat immigrants, or the way that we scapegoat poor people. We always blame poor people for the ailments of the country, when right now we're all realizing that it's actually the 1% or billionaires. You know, how can undocumented people pay more taxes than certain billionaires or certain corporations? So things to put into perspective. 1994, this is what I looked like. California's worst nightmare. And since we are projected to be a minority majority state, I would argue that this is the country's kind of worst nightmare. Brown immigrant kids, or kids of immigrants, that are learning a sense of history, or so learning a sense of justice out of bearing witness to it. So many of us, you know, you are in college right now, you're probably going to move on and work in industries that create policies or shifting culture or changing the paradigms that we exist. So that's the biggest fear. And if you don't believe it, we would look at history, look what happened at the Capitol in January. There's literally a group of people in this country that feel the racial anxiety towards us. And that's the other thing that I realized that happened with us as immigrants, is that we pacified undocumented immigrants. People wanted to see us as these little bunnies, or these little like individuals that are powerless, or we just here to work, we're not here to cause any trouble. And out of that, it pacifies this anxiety to be accepted. But the reality is that, I don't know, for me, it's just, I don't want to make myself feel small to make somebody else feel comfortable, right? Like, I want to exist in my own truth, in the full complexities of who I am. And if you're intimidated by how smart I am, if you're intimidated how I've been able to build and thrive despite the adversities, maybe you should ask me how I do it, so you can learn, instead of, you know, building these hurdles for me to not move forward. So I think that's the real threat, the threat that, you know,
I shine away from using the word resilience because I feel like it's a tiring word. And I know so many of us are tired of being resilient. Some of us just want to be basic, but we can't help it. Um, but I just want to I think for me is that like really realizing and my for you, you know, for anybody that's watching this, I would argue to look at younger pictures and really think about the things that you're up against and how far you've made it. Because I think it's also very important for us to take inventory of the things that we've experienced and how far we come. Because we're so busy surviving that we can't even look back and realize, wow, I did that, or like, damn, I realize I really really survived that, and I should be proud of that. So definitely take time to pause and really think about, you know, the things that you were up against. Obviously, you know, 2006, May 1st commemorates International Workers' Day. And International Workers' Day is a day where we commemorate the labor of workers throughout the world, because that's the reality. Workers are the ones that uphold economies, they're the ones that uphold societies. And obviously, we pair that with May 1st, 2006, which is the Great American Boycott. We see some mass demonstrations of people advocating for immigration reform. As you can see, I think this picture is in Los Angeles, but we're kind of seeing this kind of uprise of people kind of talking about immigration reform and people as workers. But obviously, one of the things that we're kind of really walking the dangerous lines about is this good immigrant, bad immigrant narrative. As you can see in this kind of picture, we're kind of waving American flags and wearing white. And the reality is, you know, this idea that if we want to be um, assimilated into the country, that we should learn English, pledge allegiance, and really adapt American values. And obviously now we're fighting that, right? Because now, thanks to, you know, to the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that we're doing to shift our perspective about policing and really challenging our unconscious bias towards minorities and communities, we're realizing that, you know, slogans like the defund the police are more out of gearing towards how do we can provide social services to communities that need them, right? And communities that need them. And so I think this is very interesting because now we talk about criminalizing immigrants and the way that we criminalize and police certain communities. So I think for me now is how do we break that dichotomy of who we view as deportable, expendable, who we can throw away, and who are the people that are worthy to be here. Obviously, I think in the grand scheme of things, someone like me that speaks English, grew up in this country, knows American culture, I kind of remember the Pledge of Allegiance. I do remember the Pledge of Allegiance. Um, would be considered a good immigrant, and some a bad immigrant would be considered someone with a criminal record, someone that might have a DUI, someone that, you know, because of the trauma. Imagine going through all these xenophobic experiences and still being able to live a normal life without, you know, resorting to crime or any of these things, right? So really questioning these ideas of what does that mean. 2012 was a big moment for us. I make a joke that if you wanted to be in vogue, 2012 was the year for you to become undocumented. We're seeing an uprise. There's so many documentaries, movies. Everybody's writing about us. We're seeing MTV's doing performances. Everybody's doing a performance that's featuring undocumented people. We love cover of the Time magazine. We're realizing now there's 11 million. There's probably more. And we're kind of gaining undocumented power and visibility. People are coming out to the streets. They're coming out of the shadows movement. We're out here declaring to people out in public, we're undocumented, we're unafraid. And before they used to like pixelate our faces and play with our voices when we would come out on TV. But now we're like, we're gonna let people know what we look like. Which I think for me, this was important. It was super significant. Um, because I say there's nothing beautiful about being undocumented. There really isn't anything. We just make it cute because we have no other option, but there really isn't anything beautiful. But the beauty that it is to be out as an undocumented person is that we kind of found each other. We found other people that are doing really amazing work. We found other sources of inspiration. And we saw, you know, people that are graduating from colleges that are like, how did you do that? And learning from one another. And I think that's what was most significant, that we're starting to see support groups and communities that kind of show examples of the ways that we make it. Um, obviously in 2018 is when DACA got rescinded. The DACA program, obviously, we say that it's a band-aid solution to something super, super big. And they said that they didn't want to do no more applications, that this program was, illegal or it wasn't constitutional. So now we're trying to figure out what is the argument, what's going to happen. If you have DACA, you know what a constant roller coaster it is to exist under this status. But I think thankfully now there's organizations like Immigrant Rising, there's doing amazing work and trying to help us and teaching us how to start our own companies, right? So many of us come from entrepreneur families. You have a mama that makes flan, you have someone that's embroidering something, costureras. We have so many families. So how I think now it's how do we leverage our talents into businesses and start working as that, because that's the way that we're going to continue to build generational wealth and continue to, again, navigate upward mobility. I talk about celebrity culture, so many celebrity culture, how they had our backs, and it's important for us for messaging. But I think right now, one of the things, obviously, we're talking about language and how it's evolving, how so many of us are kind of now more really thinking critically of words like dreamer, or they call it the dreamer narrative. Like, how do we create more narratives that are more expansive and inclusive of the people that uplifted us, right? Because oftentimes it felt like we were kind of trading off or throwing our families under the bus in order for us to get citizenship. And it's, and I think that's the conditional love of our parents. How many of our parents have told us, I don't care if I don't get papers as long as you do, which is such a sacrificial, Jesus Christ moment. But for me, it's more like, no, I want, what makes me feel that my grandma is just less deserving of citizenship than I am, when she's the one that protected me from a country for it not to eat me whole. So for me, that's why I'm a huge advocate to showcasing, workers, regular people, the people that people are rude to at the subway, las señoras that put up with so many, we call them microaggressions, but they were just like, oh, they're just rude. Like, I want to showcase those people that, the world is not kind to, or the people that people don't tip or ignore, or are invisible to the average American. So I think for me, it's like, how do we bridge that and showcase more of that so we don't get stuck again in this trade-off. I think for me, what's next, I'm trying to develop more narratives. I have my video on DocuJoy, which is a video that we produced. And in this video, the whole thing was, I want to see undocumented people smiling and creating. Like, I documented people as artists. I wanted to see us beyond our status, because we are that. Our status is not an identity. There's nothing, it's a condition. It's not an identity. So there's nothing in your body, nothing in your spirit, nothing in your creativity. So really be aware of that. I also have my book club. One of the biggest things with my book club is, how do I promote contemporary Latinx authors? But beyond that, undocumented authors, right? People that have this lived experience. And what's beautiful now is that there's so many of us that have our writers that now we're creating our own little undocumented canon. And when before it was other people writing about our experiences and we were just the subjects, but now we're like, no, I want to write it on my own and I want to create my own story. So The Undocumented Americans by Carla Correjo Vicencio, a beautiful book. I feel like if this is a book that you need to read if you're feeling down or sad, or you're going through the motions of, that it is, that book will reinvigorate you into thinking of really, really, really claiming your power. Children of the Land by Marcelo Hernandez Castillo, another beautiful book that follows his journey as someone that's adjusting their status and returning back to Mexico on advance parole. If you have DACA, I would definitely highly encourage you to look at advance parole, a special permission for you to travel back to your home country or any country outside of the US. I know there's a lot of fear in leaving the US, but if you, reach out or talk to a lawyer, or a way for you to apply for that program, there's a lot of benefits. And obviously, so many of us left our homelands when we were young, so we don't remember our homelands exist as a metaphor. But I think there's something really impactful about returning and really, really, really realizing, who you are, your place in the world. The Body Papers by Grace, another amazing book. She's a Filipina author. Obviously, now we have authors that come from different backgrounds, and we realize that this is not a Latino issue. This is something international. This is something that impacts all of our communities. And the other thing for me too, like how do we also within us read about other communities that we might not be relationship to. And right now also, what we're seeing in Haiti, we're seeing with the migrants of Haiti at the border. So really, really how to create these narratives that are expansive, inclusive, but also really, really um, really personal that makes it universal. So these are some books. Should you be interested in starting your own book club and reading it along with somebody, those are the ones that I recommend. And yeah, this is kind of the work that I'm doing. You can find most of the stuff on my website, yosimar.com. You'll find videos, you'll find different writings. And then you can, if you have on Instagram, you can feel free to follow me. I'm constantly posting like resources or try to help as much as possible with information. And there's a lot of great organizations in the Bay Area and throughout that provide assistance for, right, like DACA renewals to assistance with, advanced parole. There's a lot of Facebook groups that we're learning from one another and supporting one another. So yeah, this is kind of my stuff. And now I would love to see if you have any questions or comments. I would like to get to them. So yeah, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Yosimar. As always, always enlightening and always entertaining. Just some of the things that you say in your comedy that you bring into your commentary with us. So thank you so much for that. So for those of you who are out there in the audience, you are welcome to write down in the Q&A some any questions you may have for Yosimar. While we're getting started with that, and folks feel free to chime in there. We've got about 12 minutes here for some Q&A. I'll start off with one of the Q&As, Yosimar. And we often talk about in our communities of color this whole idea of intersections. And for one, something that I relate with you is that I am also queer, and I'm also Filipino American, son of immigrants, and so on and so forth, right? So I'm curious how your intersections, particularly your queerness, has played into other elements of your identity, including your being undocumented.
Yeah, I think for me that was the hardest part, right? Like at 16 was really difficult. I think this is if you're queer, like it's a whole different other aspect of coming out. For me, I think I talk a lot about being immigrant because I have this direct relationship. I was talking about even, like sometimes even narratives of coming out tend to be very centered around whiteness. And then we talk about how even those communities, right, you get to move. The dream is like, I'm gonna move to a neighborhood like the Castro, Boys Town, West Hollywood. And for us who are poor, queer, and immigrants, we don't move. We have to stay in our community. So we stay with your abuela, we stay in the east, we stayed in the east side of whatever city. And so for me, I think that was the hardest thing to accept because I thought that by me coming out as queer, it was gonna be the biggest disappointment in my family, right? Like it was gonna take down all my accomplishments. And obviously, I think it's very important to also, as I'm talking about undocumented people, it's also important to recognize that sometimes we do come from cultures that tend to be they're more homophobic or or sexist. We still have those internal conflicts. But I think for me that was the biggest thing of like I felt that my grandparents did not bring me to this country for me to be gay. But I think as soon as I learned to accept it and I learned to see this as my biggest gift and my biggest asset, is that I really, really started to learn to tap into my power. And now the reason that I don't find so much conflict within it is because it's such a natural part of who I am, and it's something that I can control. It's who I am, how I carry myself. But I think for me now, the challenge, right, is that now I'm helping my family learn new language, learn new ways for them to shift the perspective and the ideas they have when it comes to the LGBT community. And it does take a lot of patience. I mean, because, they're immigrants, they're surviving, they're working class, they're just, so I think for me, the bottom line is just teaching them how to be more respectful and make more informed opinions than just what they see on TV and whatnot. But now I celebrate it. I love the intersections. I think it's really amazing that I can be speak two languages and be who I am fully in all the complexities. So yeah.
Yeah, and Yosi, it's funny because when I was in high school, college, my parents were devout Catholics, and so I even was a church pianist for many many years, and I did everything for the church, and then of course coming out, it definitely made things very different in the family dynamic because it's like that's very traditional, and how do I reconcile that idea of spirituality and religion. So kind of connected to that, do you find any solace in religious and spiritual elements as you go through your identity and your stories that you tell to other folks?
Yeah, we grew up Baptist, so similar. Like I like church. I think it was fun, and I think that so many immigrants do grapple to religious churches and whatnot because it's a way of building community. So many of us are so isolated that the only place that you're gonna find other people from your same communities and places of worship. So I think I really like that aspect about church that it made it we were left feel less alone, and people wanted to help us, right? And so I think that's why we're like, okay, we're part of a little group, a community. But obviously, once I got older and I reached 12 and 13 and I started really understanding some of the messaging, I was like, oh, maybe this is not for me. But I think I really learned a really huge sense of respect, and a sense of helping others, right? Like your mission, hopefully, if you have enough, the thing is to share it. And so for me, I think I really grapple with that. And also, yeah, sometimes when I'm stressed and I don't have any solutions, I find myself like, oh my God, I'm afraid. I don't know if it's gonna work, but it's gonna work. And so far I feel like there's a higher purpose and higher power because I don't know how many. I think about that. Like, I don't know how many undocumented kids from Eastside San Jose can say that, have been able to help their family out. And so that's why I'm really, really grateful. And yeah, faith. You gotta have faith because then what's the point?
Right. Thank you, Yossi. So last time we saw each other was 2 years ago, before the pandemic, and you touched on a bit of this, and we got a question coming in. Okay. I'm gonna go to this. Do you think DACA will open up again sometime in the future? I feel hopeless and afraid that I would not be able to help my family if I do not have permission to work in this country. So, what are your thoughts on that, Yossi?
I feel like right now we are trying, there's so many amazing activists that are trying to hold Joe Biden and Harris accountable for the promises that they did make. And I hope so. I have an older brother that just qualified for DACA, but, he got left out. So for me, I think a lot about people that don't have DACA because I know how hard it is. And I know the stress that it is to know that you're qualified for a job, often overqualified. And I think I'm hoping, right? And hopefully, I think so. I think it's very hard to know. So many of us are already working in our industries. We already graduated from college. I have so many friends who are lawyers, doctors, doing amazing things. So I think if anything, it's still this country needs our talents to continue to build. And so I think, for you, I would hope, the alternatives. And I know it's very difficult. It sounds very easy for me, like, oh, keep your head up, but I think it's very difficult. But I think that's why I'm so grateful for Immigrants Rising. I got tired of the anxiety that comes with DACA. So I decided to start my own company. So I started my LLC, and I've been following their webinars on how to continue to build my business. And through my LLC, I continue to work as an independent contractor, and people can actually hire me. So if DACA does go away, they take my social security number, at least I have my business entity that can continue to help me support my family. So obviously, this is a lot of work, but I know that there's great organizations that do that. And then for you who does not have DACA, I think the biggest thing is, asking for help. I did that, when I didn't have any help. That's how when I didn't have DACA, I was transferring to San Francisco State, and there was no money. Like, how am I gonna pay for school? But I was like, I'm building relationships with people, and because people believe in my story, and people believe that I'm a community investment, that I'm gonna go off and but I'm gonna come back and help the people out that I come from. That, you know, people are more inclined to help out. So yeah, I would say those are my, and I know it's very difficult, so I don't want to diminish that anxiety. But I think at the end, the consistency is what pays off. So, you know, and if I can be of any help, you can reach out to me and I'll try.
And you know, to your point, Yossi, there's going to be in the month of November, there are going to be they're going to continue to receive comments about the legislation. So I'm hoping that maybe in November we'll have more information from the legal side, whether or not that's going to happen or not. And but we definitely encourage those of you who are out there to reach out to your colleagues at the colleges. We are definitely here to support you at CCC, LMC, and DVC. For those of you who are out there, take a look at our website. It's undoc4cd.org. And that lists all the wonderful events that we have throughout the rest of this week. And we'll also be hosting this page for future events throughout the whole district. And you know, Yossi, for example, will be coming back to us to close off our week this Thursday. So we are so lucky to have Yosimar with us, not once but twice this week. And then throughout the week, we're going to have tomorrow in person at Contra Costa College from 11 to 12. We're going to have a financial resources session. And then those of you might be asking about the legal services and questions about immigration policy. We're going to have two sessions, one on Tuesday, and then once again on Wednesday in the afternoon on DACA and immigration policy updates with the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area. Our staff attorney, Denny Casa, will be there to help answer some of your questions and go through the latest information and legislative stuff that's going on out there with the feds, okay? So those just take a look at our website for those of you who are out there to look at the rest of our events that are out there for the rest of this week. So Yossi, I think like I mentioned earlier, the last time we saw each other, we live in a very, very different world back then. It's like we can have your presence in front of us and we can laugh together, we can smile together. And we had a great time. Now, during this time of COVID, you know, for our undocumented folks that are out there, what kind of last words would you have for them as we are still somewhat, you know, we're still somewhat separate from each other. So what would you
Yeah, I think, you know, I think for me, it goes without saying, I think this pandemic has impacted our communities definitely very, very hard. But I think my ways were like, how do we build outlets for us to not be so consumed by everything? So I definitely encourage people, you know, try to find things that give you a sense of relief or hope. You know, like it's just so much anxiety that's happening. Your breathing exercises, if you need to nap, go make sure you go nap and all those things. Because I know that we talk about productivity so much, right? Like so many of us are barely hanging on, but really being patient, because I know that there's just so much that we are confronting and facing. And I try to create those spaces. You know, I have my book club. We're promoting books all the time because it gives you an outlet to escape. And I know some people view that like, oh my God, I already have homework. Why am I going to read another book? But I did. But I think for me, it's a meditation. Journaling is definitely very helpful. You know, documenting. We're talking about how so many of our families, we don't write down actual dates. Things happen to us and we don't actually write exact dates. So if you're into writing or in a creative process, definitely journaling is super significant. And again, you know, seeking out the support systems and not being afraid to ask for help. Yeah, just, you know,
Great.
you're not alone. So yeah.
Thank you, Yosimar. Well, folks out there in Zoom land, thank you for joining us for Undocumented Student Action Week. We've just started. Today's our first day. We've got a lot more events coming up. And please join us on Thursday afternoon. We'll be having another talk with Yossi to close us out at 4:30 on Thursday. We're not going to do webinar that time, but we'll actually do a Zoom so we can have a little more of an intimate conversation. And with that, Yosimar, thank you for joining us once again. We will see you on Thursday. And for everybody else out there, please reach out to us if you have any additional questions, and we will see you throughout the rest of this week. Thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Take good care, stay healthy and safe. Thanks, everybody. Take care, everybody.